Management Accounting Redefining Business.
On the panel we have Charles Tilley, Chief Executive CIMA, Satyanarayan Bansal, Chief Executive Officer, Barclays Wealth and Investment Management India, Richard Rekhi, Chief Executive Officer, KPMG India, and Dr. Ruchi Das, Founder, HealthCursor Consulting Group.
We'll start now with this special panel discussion, Management Accounting, Redefining Business, brought to you only on ET Now. So let's start off this discussion and really understand the principles of management accounting and why they are relevant to your business. Charles, you just made that presentation, and many would say, and perhaps some of us in the audience, that the world has been limping back to some sort of normalcy in the last 7 or 8 years. If you talk about certainty, we seem to be in a better place now. So why would I really want to apply some of these principles that you just shared with us? Why would I feel the need to do so?
Well, I think all organizations are always seeking to be better and more successful. And therefore, if you think about organizations, they're continuing benchmarking themselves against the competition, they're benchmarking themselves against other sectors and so forth. And you see, for instance, I'm on the board of a hospital and we're continually benchmarking ourselves, for instance, against airlines, because that is about safety and safety first, which is health and airlines together. Now, at the same time, you're trying to develop your management accounting function to make sure it is actually going to really help you be as successful as possible. And that, is there are some organizations which are absolutely great, and the research would suggest that they genuinely have the best management accounting functions. But even when I talk to them, they would say, you may think we're great, but we've got pockets of excellence, but we haven't got it everywhere, and we need some way of being able to benchmark our activities. And if we then go to companies which are growing, they are really in need of support as they change and grow, because they're going through a huge change. And if I take the public sector in the UK, which was really, really keen on our management accounting principles, it's because they are really struggling to measure the value they are providing to the UK citizens. And actually, they have said they're going to adopt these principles in every department across UK government.
Right. So most of these companies, I presume, would have been overseas, the ones that you have surveyed. I think some of the interesting results was that 73% of those surveyed said that successful companies will increasingly need to empower workers to make autonomous decisions. However, when we come to the Indian context, and you mentioned public sector companies, India is, of course, a very different animal. And Richard, in this process, as I mentioned, we are limping back to normalcy. Growth seems to be coming back. Companies have had to undergo very painful transitions. And also the role of the CFO has had to change with all the storms that have been weathered, both in the public as well as the private sector arena. Where do you think India is placed currently, especially in the current context of some of these management accounting principles, to really, actually adopt them and, to take these forward?
I think you rightly said India has evolved. Actually, if you ask me, this 2008 onwards of 2009 has been really good for the global economy and Indian economy, because everybody shed off their fat and the excess. So actually, we are ready for the growth. In fact, India is possibly the only country that is growing.
Right.
But with growth, you need some good controls, you need some good health checks, because you can grow, but you have to grow profitably. You have to ensure that there's adequate allocation of capital to the right projects. So I think all those you need some kind of benchmarks to which you will look at, because today what does the CFO do? In fact, I would also like to just define whether the CFO truly understands their role. And I would like to challenge that, because the role of CFO in India has actually evolved, and most of the CFOs actually operate like controllers, and they have not got out of that role of controller and actually becoming a partner to the CEO, which is actually the role of a CFO. Because CFO, in my opinion, and in most more advanced or mature economies, have a similar position in power like a CEO. they are the ultimate on finance. They are the last point out there. And I think that role gets defined. This principles, once you have, there will be good way to see the health check. All companies, however big or small, will need these health checks to actually work.
Satya, let me come to you as a natural corollary, because you're working with and advising many of these large family-owned enterprises which have had their own legacy issues, whether it's in the powers or the autonomy given to the CFO vis-a-vis, of course, the control wielded by families. Have things really changed on the ground?
What we have seen in Indian context, that many of these businesses which have got multi-entities, multiple businesses, the decision-making on strategic issues, particularly capital allocation, project decisions, are taken at the group level. And in our experience, working with the family boards and some of the larger families, and even some of the mid-market families, we believe that the group CFO role is not that well, you can say, empowered from a strategic perspective at the family board level. Now, the family board could be well structured, well defined, or it could be loosely constructed, whatever could be the shape and the size.
Satya, here you're referring mostly to the large family-owned businesses, right? What about the small and medium enterprises? And Ruchi, I'd like to bring you in here because you're both advising them and you've invested in them. Have things changed on the ground?
Not much, actually. I still see a lot of SMEs and MSMEs providing large employment opportunities in India and adding a lot to our GDP, whether it's export or industrial production and so on and so forth. But they are financially, when you see their structure, they're poorly structured. Sometimes they don't feel that they are large enough to actually invest in something like this or structure themselves up. And that actually is an impediment to the growth.
What about the smaller guys? You know, we started by talking about the SMEs, and they actually represent the lion's share of companies in India. So, Ruchi, when you go about investing, and you've invested in quite a few companies, does this seem familiar to you?
It does, actually, and that's why when I read the principles for the first time, I was very happy because it definitely acts as a guide. See, when you actually invest in a company, at that point in time, the decision making is more around the product, or probably the ROI that you will get in the market. But sooner or later, what comes as a question is, are we getting the right information? Do we have access, all the stakeholders within and the leadership has access to the right resources, probably data sets that cut across silos and is available to everybody to basically make an integrated decision making. When CIMA has tied up with AICPA, that's what they are trying to create, universal standards, basically a guide which is at a high level still, where it doesn't matter what is the nature of the business. It could be an SME, it could be a large organization, it could be healthcare, it could be power, and so on and so forth. And I think more and more people who actually pass senior schools today should be put into some kind of a CIMA degree. You know, at that point in time, the exposure and the skill set that is required, it's paramount, especially for SMEs, where skill retention is a big challenge.
But coming back to the role of a CFO, and Richard, you know, it's a bit of a chicken and egg, because when typically, and that's a perception, a CFO says, listen, this is my job, this is what I'm going to do, and you know, if the management wants me to do more or whatever it is, I'll react accordingly. And perhaps at the other end, the CEO is frustrated that, listen, why isn't he enabling me or giving me that kind of strategic input which I'm really looking at? And that's always a struggle, isn't it? Which way to play sort of that coin?
Yeah, that's true. You see, the more forward-looking CEOs fit into that role easily because they understand the business. And I think the basic comes from the grounding from when you grow up as a chartered accountant or cost and management accountant or whatever. And then you actually play a very siloed role and you don't understand the business. The only time that you can actually provide value to the CEO or to the business is if you understand the business and what makes that business tick, what makes that business grow, what is it that you can do different, because that's when you add value. And I think that's when CFOs need to understand the role that they can play, because then they become the natural successors to the CEO, and they can become the future CEOs of that company or many other companies. And I think the quicker they realize this, the better it is for them, better for the company, because then they become a partner to the CEO. They are, because now what's happening, many of the CFOs are unable to grow out of the controller role. They're still there in cost cutting, into all these. So you look at any spend, you say, okay, what do I cut cost? You won't look at the opportunity which is there. And just to take Charles' point on that risk, I always give this example of this car. Why do cars have brakes? So that you can drive faster. And so if you have good controls and good mechanism which you can measure yourself, actually you will be able to grow faster and do better than what anybody else will. Right.